On the last episode of Menace, the Ken story. Things got real messed up at that point. Well, I messed everything up. My mind was in a million places. It was my plan to go smoke a blunt before driving home. But for some reason, I did something completely different. I don't know. I think the sole reason was the universe's grand plan for me to mess my life up. I had some cocaine in the glove compartment, and for the first time, I decided to try it. I don't know why. Scratch that. I do know why. I needed something more. I had just witnessed something that was absolutely insane. I needed to forget. I needed to go further, just for a little while. And once I did, there was no going back. I was higher than those men who went to the moon, allegedly. And in my altered state, my mind changed, all on its own. The plan had been to go home, but suddenly my mind told me to go to Shelonda's house. After everything I'd seen that night, I needed her. I just needed something to be good and normal and right. But when I got there, everything went wrong. I had parked around the corner and walked to Shelonda's house, just like I always did. But when I got to her window, it was locked. Why was her window locked? Shelonda's window wasn't ever locked. I had been going in and out of that window at my leisure all summer, but suddenly it was locked. I later find out that Shelonda wasn't expecting me because she'd assumed that we would go back to our regular school schedule, but I didn't know that at the time. And honestly, I didn't have the capacity to think to that degree. I was so high. And even though I didn't really drink, I'd had a beer on the way there too. The same combination that made me feel invincible had suddenly caused me to become angry and suspicious. A bunch of thoughts crossed my mind. For some reason, I started wondering if Omar had gotten into Shelonda's ear when I was in juvie. They'd probably been hooking up this whole time, and I introduced them by giving him that letter to give her. I thought, and that absolutely infuriated me. I knocked on Shelonda's window. I honestly don't remember all the details, but I do remember the anger. I was so angry. I remember asking why her window was locked and being angry that she was confused about why I was questioning her. In the mind of a hurt, bothered, unstable, and high 18-year-old boy, I felt like I knew what she was doing. I felt like she was doing to me what I had done to her. When Shelonda confronted me about Melanie, I knew I was caught, but I didn't know what to say. My only defense was to act confused. I felt like that's what Shelonda was doing, and it ticked me off. I grabbed Shelonda and pulled her to the bathroom. A part of me just wanted to make sure that nobody was in there. I don't know. I was obsessed with the idea that she had locked the window so she could sleep with somebody else. But after I saw that there was no one in the bathroom, I was still angry. I couldn't turn it off. It was strange because even though I was angry, I still wanted Shelonda. I wanted to touch her. I wanted to feel her. I wanted her to be there for me, but I couldn't say that. I didn't know how to. It wasn't me. My mind wasn't mine. My body didn't even feel like mine. It was like I was looking at it all happening, but I couldn't stop it, like I was somebody else. I pushed Shelonda onto the bathroom floor, and I just took all of my anger and frustration out on her. She did not want to have sex. Not like that. I could tell, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like being on a merry-go-round, one of the ones at the playground. It swirls around really quickly so everything runs together. But every once in a while, you can catch a clear glimpse of something. In a sea of blur, that one thing just stands out for some reason. That's how the whole thing played out. The one thing that I clearly remember is Shelonda's face. Even now, she was so hurt. She was quietly sobbing, and I understood that I had hurt her very deeply. After it hit me, I couldn't take it. I couldn't look at her like that, so I left. I didn't say anything to her. I just left out of the same window that I had crawled in through. I sat behind the wheel of my car and cried. When I say I cried, I really mean that I sobbed. It was one of those really hard cries where you hyperventilate and struggle to catch your breath. I remember saying out loud, "Why did you do that, Ken?" Like I was talking to somebody else. I was so angry. I repeatedly struck the steering wheel with my hands, all the while asking myself why I had chosen to hurt Shelonda, the one good thing in my life. I had a whole conversation with myself that night, and in my now adult mind, I realized that the conversation was an expression of how much hurt was really there. Still sitting in the car around the corner from Shelonda's house, I yelled things like, "My brother is really dead. Kenny is never coming back. My mama was smoking crack. I'm all alone out here. Lorenzo, that's who took my brother away? Lorenzo, who I looked at like a brother. Lorenzo, who my brother looked at like a brother. That nigga? I was moving up. He was probably going to kill me too." Rob smothered Lorenzo with a plastic bag in front of his brother. What did Rob do to Hot Boy's mom? How Hot Boy see this nigga Rob every day and know that? Hot Boy said the first one was the hardest. How many deaths has he seen? I just raped Shelonda. She's never gonna forgive me. It's over. It's all over. Everything's over. She didn't deserve that. She deserves so much more than me. I can't trust nobody. Shelonda can't trust me. I hate my life. I hate everybody. I hate myself. I don't even want to be here no more. I just sat there and cried. And when I got home, I decided that I would break up with Shelonda the next day. She didn't deserve what I had done to her. She didn't deserve the life that I lived. Chapter 15, Promise. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. That next day was so hard. I woke up to the news that Lorenzo's body had been found at a public playground. I know that sounds harsh, but there was still some love and respect in that. Rob could have had Mike and Tommy dump Lorenzo off a bridge like they did to Junie, the guy that killed Kenny. Instead, they made sure that he was in a public place, somewhere he'd be easily found. His mother wouldn't have to spend countless hours wondering where he was. Mac wouldn't have to have a closed casket funeral while fully knowing the details. In a clear headspace, I knew what Rob said was true. We couldn't have ever trusted Lorenzo again. And even though I was in a messed up place about it all, I hated Lorenzo for what he did to Kenny. I couldn't guarantee that I wouldn't have done something to him if Rob hadn't, but I didn't have the time to dwell on that. It was done, and I had business of my own. I drove to Shelonda's bus stop, having no idea what I'd say to her. I knew that there was a conversation to be had, but I chose to keep it pleasant for as long as I could. She got into the car, and I could see the hurt in her face. I could tell she'd been crying, and that hit me in a deep, dark place. It was like somebody had punched me in the stomach. All I could say was, "Hey, baby." She responded, "Hey." We drove to our spot in the woods in complete silence. We unpacked our usual stuff that we carried into the shack, also in complete silence. But once we got inside, Shelonda immediately started speaking. "We gotta talk," she said. I felt it coming. She was about to tell me that we were done. She was about to tell me that I had hurt her beyond the point of making it right. She was about to tell me that the one good thing in my life was over, and I couldn't let her say it. I had come there prepared to tell her that she was too good for me, because she was. And for that reason, I was prepared to let her go. But I couldn't say it any more than I could allow her to say it. It was Wednesday. It was our day, and she was mine. She was my girl. Shelonda was my one good thing. I was not going to lose her on some random Wednesday morning in a dingy shack in the woods. I felt like I was in a fight for my life. So I fought. I got onto my knees, positioning myself between Shelonda's legs. I told her that she was the most important thing in my life, and I meant that. I couldn't afford the luxury of being completely honest with Shelonda, but I was as honest as the situation would allow. Prior to that point, I had shielded Shelonda from so much of my life, but I needed her to understand that I hadn't ever wanted to hurt her. She was just the most unfortunate of victims because she was the closest person to me. Shelonda asked me to get off of my knees. I felt that I was humbling myself before her, but she didn't like it for some reason. So I sat beside her and held her hand. I told Shelonda about my parents' arrest and how I had been living on my own. I excluded the whole thing about Lorenzo getting a bag to the face, of course. I made it obvious that I was going through a lot. and I had overindulged in weed and alcohol to cope. And I left out the part about the cocaine, of course. The crazy thing is, I had hurt Shelonda so badly. I knew that. Even still, she wanted to know if I was okay. She wanted to know why I hadn't talked to her about what I was going through, and that just made it worse for me. She was concerned about me after what I had done to her. But I continued my fight, and I sealed it. I said, "Baby, if you give me one more chance, I promise to never hurt you again." I hate how many times I ended up breaking that promise over the years. We talked it all out, and there were some deep things that came out of that day, things that followed us for the rest of our lives. We spent the day in the shack just being together. We talked, and I got breakfast from my favorite place, the same place where me and Kenny ate on the day that he died. When it was time for me to take Shelonda back to her bus stop, I told her that I had a surprise for her. Under different circumstances, I could have done better, but we were on borrowed time. I had only come up with the idea when I ran out for food, but I felt like I needed to do something for her. All of the items were things that I had gotten from my house, but Shelonda seemed to be happy. I retrieved a Polaroid camera from my trunk, and we took some pictures. One of the things that bothered Shelonda about the cheating situation was the fact that Melanie had a picture of us. I wanted to even that out for her. The other two items belonged to Grandma. One thing was an old keepsake box that Grandma kept papers in. I gave it to Shelonda because I knew that she couldn't just keep our pictures laying around. Her parents were strict, and they probably wouldn't be okay with it. The second thing that I gave her was a ring that also belonged to Grandma. It wasn't anything fancy. In fact, it wasn't even real. It had been sitting in a box in the garage since he passed away. I had seen both of those things over the years, and I hadn't thought twice about either of them. But I wanted to give Shelonda something, and it was short notice. What better thing to give her than something that belonged to Grandma? Besides, life was getting crazy for me. I wanted Shelonda to have something to remember me by, just in case life really started lifing. You know, like it did for Lorenzo. And that's when the thing happened. The thing that would follow us for the rest of our lives. I explained to Shelonda that the ring was a symbol of my promise to love and protect her for as long as I was alive. In accepting it, I made her promise to do the same. I made her promise to love and protect me forever. I also made her promise that she'd always be mine, because I needed to hear her say that. We both agreed that we were permanently and irreversibly bonded for life. Fortunately and unfortunately, we both meant that. After that, me and Shelonda got tight. I mean, really tight. I still made sure to shield her from the illegal part of my life, but I meant it when I said that we were forever bonded. We were locked in. I opened up to her in a way that I hadn't ever done with anybody else. I told her everything about my life at home, about Pop's cheating, Mom and Pop's fighting, Pop smoking crack, Kenny and Pop's relationship, Grandma passing away, us moving into Grandma's house, Kenny getting killed, Ma and Pop's getting arrested, me finding out that Ma was smoking crack, and me awaiting Ma's court date. I stopped short of telling her about my life with Rob and the crew. I wanted to, but I knew I couldn't. Shelonda had no exposure to that type of life. I had no idea how she'd feel about it. Besides, I couldn't take the chance of Rob finding out that I told her and putting plastic bags over our faces. Shelonda told me quite a bit about her life at home, too. I learned that her mom worked a lot, and she was basically a full-time caretaker for her mentally disabled little sister. Shelonda had always told me that her parents were strict, but I learned that it was mostly her stepfather, and she couldn't stand him. I understood. Pops was my real father, and I couldn't stand him either. What I came to understand most is that we were very much alike. Shelonda and I were both given far more responsibility than we should have had at our ages, and eventually, the family issues would eat us alive. It was December. It was so cold that day. I got dressed and drove to Shelonda's bus stop, halfway mad that I had to get out of bed. But I had promised Shelonda that I would take her to school every day and pick her up in the afternoons. I waited at the bus stop. The bus came and went, and there was no Shelonda. Maybe she's sick, I thought. But that didn't really make sense to me. Shelonda knew to page me if she wasn't coming to school. She wouldn't just not show up. I sat for a moment, wondering if I should just leave. Suddenly, I saw Shelonda running towards the car. And I mean, she was running. She jumped into the car, all out of breath. When she turned to face me, I could tell that she had been involved in something violent. Her nose was bloody and her clothes were all over the place. I kept asking what happened. Shelonda was sobbing. Through the tears, she said, "Just drive." Now, I know the rules are the rules for a reason. I also know that rules are meant to be broken. For the most part, we didn't bring women to our houses. It wasn't something that was set in stone, but Rob always cautioned us against letting the women in our lives get too close. Well, Rob also cautioned us against having serious women in our lives. We all agreed that it wasn't a good practice to bring women to where we lived. The answer was simple. According to Rob, women are vicious and temperamental at the most. At the least, they're too emotional. In the short version, women in business don't mix. We weren't ever forbidden from bringing women into our personal lives, just strongly cautioned against it. That's why they always went to see the women at their places, or some of the guys would get a hotel room if they wanted to chill. But if it came down to it, most women wouldn't ever have been able to point out any of our residences to the police. Rob preferred it that way. But like I said, rules were meant to be broken, and Shelonda wasn't just some girl. She was my girl, and she needed me. So I drove Shelonda to my house. I sat on the couch beside her and asked what was going on. Shelonda had finally stopped sobbing and she was able to talk. And what she said? Woo. Shelonda told me that she'd had an argument with her stepdad that morning, which had resulted in him putting his hands on her. "Is this the first time?" I asked. "No," said Shelonda. "He has been verbally and physically abusive since the beginning." Then she just sat there crying, and deep down, I knew there was something else. So I asked. Even though I was scared to know, I asked, "Baby, has he ever touched you? Sexually?" Shelonda paused for a second, and that was enough for me. The average person would have answered that very quickly. It would have been so distasteful to the point that they would have wanted to dispose of the idea as quickly as possible. But Shelonda paused, and that told me that there was something more. It was as if a volcano erupted inside of me. I just went off. I was yelling, screaming, and knocking stuff off the table. Some harm had to come to that nigga, and I knew it. But then I heard Shelonda's voice. It cut through the chaos like a knife. "We never had sex," she screamed. "What?" I turned around and realized that Shelonda was digging herself out of the corner of the couch. Apparently, I had shoved her down when I was going off. She stood and took my hand. "Ken, just sit down and listen, and I'll explain everything." Man, Shelonda blew my mind that day. She told me that her stepdad had been touching and kissing on her since she was 12 years old. 12 years old. What goes on in the mind of a grown man who finds anything attractive about a 12-year-old child? I was so mad, but it was about to get worse. I asked Shelonda why she hadn't ever told me about what she was going through. "It's not really the kind of thing you just tell somebody," said Shelonda. "I'm not just somebody," I said. I told her that I was dead serious when I promised that I had her. It was still early. My plan was to let Shelonda rest and just get away for the day. I'd figure everything out about her step-pops at a later date. But I asked if she needed anything. She asked if I had any pain relievers. I assumed that she probably had a headache from crying and such. But when she showed me why she needed the pain relievers, I was seeing red. Shelonda removed her shirt. She had bruises all over her stomach, arms, and back. I took her into my bedroom and gave her some clothes to change into. When she removed her pants, she had bruises on her legs as well. Man, I was so mad. Shelonda grabbed my hand and told me that it was okay. I got the feeling that she had gone through it with him before, and that made me even madder. There was absolutely no way that I was going to let him get away with doing that to her. He had to pay. I'm never going to say that what I did was right, but I justified it at the time because I needed to. Shelonda had asked me for some pain pills, so I gave her some. Granted, they were a bit stronger than your average over-the-counter variety. And once she was out, I went to handle my business. I didn't really think the situation through. In my mind, he just had to pay. I drove to Shelonda's house and prepared to go inside, and take care of her stepdad. But when I pulled up, he was outside at the mailbox. He was a short little dude too. I just jumped out and let him have it. I beat and kicked him until I was tired. And after I was tired, I kicked him in the ribs a few more times, just because I remembered what Shelonda's body looked like. Before I left, I issued a warning. If you ever touch Shelonda again, I'm gonna come back and kill you. And I meant that. But that was neither here nor there. Shelonda was with me. I went and bought some things for her to be at my house. Clothes, toiletries, etc. I only got sweatpants and stuff because I didn't know her sizes. But I was thinking she'd probably be out of school for a few days while she was healing. I'd have time to get her some real clothes before she went back to school. I went home and found that Shelonda was already back up. Not only was she up, but she was cooking my favorite meal, fried chicken, mac and cheese, and peas. I started smiling the second I saw her. She looked a mess, but that was to be expected. I smiled because I envisioned the life that I could have with her. Shelonda was in the kitchen. She smiled when she saw me. And even though I was only 18, I imagined that exact same scene playing out over and over again. I imagined coming home to her forever. But that got crushed big time. I asked Shelonda why she wasn't resting. She told me that she had decided to cook something for me before she went back home. Home? Why would you even think of going back there? I asked. Shelonda explains it, and it made sense. I just didn't want to hear it. Shelonda was still a minor. Her parents would have had to give her permission to move out, and she knew that they'd never agreed to it. Basically, she had to go back home. The worst part about it was there was nothing that I could do about it. So I decided to just enjoy the moment. I watched Shelonda, and I noticed some very distinct things about the way she operated. I took 2 plates out of the cabinet and walked towards the stove. "What are you doing?" she asked. Not thinking anything of it, I told her that I was fixing our plates. "That's nonsense," she said. "No man should ever have to make his own plate." I was completely blown away. I had seen Ma be every type of fool for Pops, yet she hadn't ever given him that type of service. It meant something, like she wanted to make sure I felt taken care of, and I loved that feeling. I sat at the table. Shelonda made my plate and brought me silverware, napkins, and tea, all before she made her own plate. She retrieved salt, pepper, and hot sauce and asked if I needed anything else. All I could say was, "No, baby." I was amazed by her, but it didn't stop there. She made a plate for herself and sat down to eat. We talked a little. Naturally, I finished eating before she did. Suddenly, she stopped eating to gather my dishes and put them in the dishwater. I never said a word. I silently watched her eat, wondering what life was really like for her. And after she was done eating, she washed the dishes and put everything away. I was crushed. Why did it have to be that way? Why did she have to leave? Why did she have to go back there? Why had I been so unfortunate to have seen the possibilities? Because that's what happened, and it tormented me. I saw us in that day. The circumstances were messed up, but I could see through it. If only our lives could align. I saw us together. I saw me coming home to her. I saw her being happy to see me. I saw her cooking for me and us talking over dinner. I could see that happening every day for the rest of my life. Yes, at 18. I hate that I saw it because it was right there. And then it wasn't. Any expectations that I had just faded away. I told Shelonda that she was always welcomed and I gave her a key. Then I drove her to her bus stop. Before Shelonda got out of the car, I told her that I loved her and that I'd always be there for her. "I promise," I said. I went home. A few hours later, the police came. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast, and feel free to share it with your friends, family, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.